Every flatbedder who ever chained down steel knows the word suicide. It isn't slang for the danger. It's a description of direction, which way the coil rolls when the chains let go, and on one loading it rolls straight at your back. There are 3 ways to lay a coil on a trailer, and the difference between them is the difference between whose problem it becomes. Set the coil with the hole facing up, eye to the sky, and it sits like a donut on the deck. But the heavy ones distort under their own weight that way, and a coil ram can't get a solid grip on the biggest ones, so you rarely see it hauled that way. That leaves 2. Turn the eye to the sides, eye crosswise, and if the coil ever breaks free, it rolls the length of the trailer, forward, into the cab. That's the suicide. Turn the eye to face front, eye lengthwise, and a loose coil rolls off the side instead, into whatever is in the next lane. Some call that one shotgun. Both are legal. Both are done every day. Somewhere in there, a legend grew up, and if you've spent time around steel, you've heard it. The story goes that a driver picks the orientation on purpose, that he loads it suicide to keep the risk on himself, to take the coil into his own cab rather than send it into a family beside him. It's a good story. The trouble is, there's a second version told just as often that says the opposite, that most drivers load shotgun precisely to save themselves and let the coil go sideways. 2 versions, flatly contradicting each other, both sworn to as gospel. When folklore points in both directions at once, that's how you know it's folklore. The real answer is less romantic and more industrial. How a coil goes on the trailer is usually decided by the crane and the forklift at the shipper's dock, not by the driver's conscience. The name stuck anyway, because it's accurate about the geometry even when it's wrong about the motive. And the geometry is the whole problem. People assume a coil is deadly because it's heavy, and it is heavy. A single coil runs 25,000 to 40,000 pounds, and the big ones push toward 47,000. That's 12 average cars of weight rolled into one cylinder. But weight isn't what sets a coil apart from any other overweight load. Shape is. A coil is a wheel. It is the one thing you can put on a flatbed that is built by its very form to roll, and a strap thrown over the top of a wheel does almost nothing to stop it turning. You can crank that strap down as hard as you like. The coil doesn't care. It isn't trying to slide off the deck the way a crate would. It's trying to roll, and every part of a cylinder helps it. That one fact, that a coil fails in a way a boxy load never will, is why steel coils eventually got a section of the federal rule book written for them alone. The trucking industry was late to all of this. The railroads had been fighting the same physics for decades before a single federal highway rule addressed it. The Association of American Railroads had a committee for exactly this, the people who wrote the loading rules for open-top rail cars, and they'd worked out how to secure coils moving by rail long before those coils ever rode a flatbed down the interstate. And they went further than rules. They built a machine for it, the coil car, a rail car with a sunken trough for a bed, so the coil settles down into a cradle and physically cannot roll anywhere. No strap holding a wheel in place by faith. When the federal trucking rule finally arrived, much of what it demanded wasn't invented fresh. It was the highway catching up to what the railmen had already learned the hard way. That rule came in the fall of 2002. And it became mandatory on the first day of 2004. It didn't come out of a single crash or a single funeral. It came out of a multi-year research program run jointly by the United States and Canada, an effort to replace a patchwork of old securement rules with one standard built on real physics. And the physics underneath it explains everything the rule asks a driver to do. The securement on any load has to survive 0.8 of a g of force throwing it forward and half a g throwing it back or to the side. That forward number isn't pulled from the air. When the government ran the numbers, 0.8 of a g was about the hardest they figured a truck could brake in the best case, empty, with warm, perfectly adjusted brakes grabbing everything they have. A loaded truck on dry pavement usually stays well below that, 6/10 at most. So the rule sets the bar right at the top of what hard braking can throw at a load. On top of that, the combined working strength of all your tie-downs has to add up to at least half the weight of the cargo, which sounds light until you know a tie-down's rated working strength is only about a third of what it takes to actually break it. Half the weight on paper is a deep reserve in practice. And for a coil, straps alone don't survive the geometry, so the coil rules go past them. Depending on how it sits, the coil gets set in a cradle, chocked, or blocked so it can't begin to roll, and then chained through the eye itself, through the hole in the center, so the restraint pulls against the roll instead of just pressing down on top of it. That's the difference the whole rule turns on. Not more chain. Chain aimed at the one thing the coil is actually trying to do. Here's where it gets strange, and where even experienced drivers get it wrong. On a suicide coil eye crosswise, the rules specifically forbid one way of chaining it that, to the eye, looks like the safest option on the trailer. Run the tie-downs diagonally through the eye so that, seen from above, they cross in a big X over the coil, and that pattern is illegal. It's illegal for a reason that isn't obvious. Crossed chains look like extra security. They feel like extra security. But on an eye crosswise coil, they do almost nothing to stop it rolling forward. And worse, they hand the driver a false sense the load is locked down when it isn't. It's the kind of mistake that spreads. One veteran steel hauler described the crossed strap habit as something a self-appointed genius started that then moved through the yards like a contagion, and noted that as far as the regulation is concerned, that X doesn't count as a securing chain at all. Men who'd hauled steel their whole lives were tying loads down in a way that looked textbook and held nothing. None of it closed the case. The rule is more than 20 years old now, and the suicide coil is still doing exactly what the name promises. On the 15th of September, 2021, a man named Blake Mulder, 33 years old, was driving on U.S. Route 127 in Butler County, Ohio, when a coil weighing 22,430 pounds came off a passing semi and came down on his vehicle. He hadn't done anything wrong. He was in the next lane. The carrier hauling that coil had been inspected 128 times in 2 years and put out of service 29 of them, and the danger was never only about highway speed. In 2015, a 46-year-old owner-operator, married with 2 children, was crushed to death at loading, not on the road at all, when the coil tipped as the crane sling was pulled out of its eye. The most dangerous moment for a coil is often the quiet one at the dock in the seconds after the crane lets go and before the chains go on. And the rulebook that was supposed to tame all of this was never actually finished. When the model regulation was written, the section covering rows of eye crosswise coils, several suicide coils lined up together, was simply left out. The man who chaired the subcommittee on metal coils later admitted it was an oversight, an inadvertent gap in the text. It was a real enough hole that carriers hauling that configuration have needed a special federal exemption just to do it legally, working under the old pre-2004 rules instead. That exemption was first granted in 2011, and it has been renewed ever since. As it stands, it runs through April of 2027. A temporary patch on a permanent rule, more than 2 decades after the standard was supposed to settle the question. The suicide coil is still out there, still turning the same direction it always did, under a law that never got the last part written.